So there's an earthly Jerusalem that sits in a location right now. There's a heavenly Jerusalem, and I think it's part of the place where Jesus says, I'm going to prepare a place for you. So this is why he was born into a family of a carpenter. There's a lot of construction work going on here. So he's got it down, in his father's shop. Yeah, no, there was Sepphoris is a city that was built just brand new city, just 2 or 3 miles from Jesus' hometown. And probably carpentry work was not, we were thinking about cabinets or things like that, but it was probably more construction, like housing construction. My guess is that Joseph and Jesus walked to that city and helped build it. It's a brand new city, started out of nothing. And they were probably involved. That's probably how they funded some of their life, was building houses in that city. And so Jesus has already got some experience with, civil engineering and some housing construction. So the new heaven is no problem. He says, I'm going to go and prepare a place for you. So he's right now kind of measuring out and getting your room just right. And he measures twice, cuts once, those kinds of things. Well, no, you know what? I'm going to argue it's more hands-on. Here's why. He could have zapped Adam and Eve into existence, and yet he breathes life into him, and he forms them out of the dust of the ground. So when Jesus says, I'm going to go prepare a place for you, I think he could say just zap, but I'm just wondering if there's not something more hands-on to it, right? It's like, I built it. You ever have someone say, they give you something, it's like, I made it with my own hands. It has a different feel to it, right? So we're going to get to heaven, and it's like, yeah, I laid the streets out. Yeah, those houses. Right, no, Jesus measures. He may measure once, cut once. He may not have to measure twice. Right. Well, yeah, I mean, how, what the nails are, I don't know. But, I'm just suggesting a more direct involvement in the construction process, that's all. And he was born into a carpenter's home is perfect for someone building a whole new city. His civil engineering skills are off the chart strong. And, so he fashioned Adam out of the dust of the ground, and he's building Jerusalem right now. So, now I do think it's probably not necessarily that he's out there measuring with the measuring tape or anything, but I am curious. We get to heaven, that's one of the things I'd like to know. Like, what is this city? But the city that's described in Ezekiel and even the book of Revelation some, but Ezekiel, the city there is massively bigger than Jerusalem today, and it would cover almost a third of the inhabitable earth today. So clearly something's different, and so we would need a very good carpenter based on the size of the city. Yeah, I mean, for sure. That's got to be, civil engineering on that thing will be spectacular. I think we'll walk in and all the engineers will walk in and go, I would have never thought to do that. Look at that. That's unbelievable. Look at that. That's amazing. So, we'll be blown away. And some of being blown away, I think, will be the nature of the location, the place, the city, the beauty, every detail in absolute perfection. We'll be blown away by our physical bodies and the resurrection that comes with the return of Christ, right? I think we'll be like, oh, this is what it feels like to be truly or fully human, right? I think so far we've only gotten the experience of what it feels like to be fully fallen human. But what it would be like to be fully human. And then what it's like to really worship. What it's like to really worship, right? Instead of the current limited worship. Not that it's not real, but it's limited. I think we'd all admit that, right? And there's a worship coming, and that will be real. And everything here is a picture of that, a type of that. So it's not bad, but it's just not quite there. And there's a real heaven, a real earth, a real Jerusalem, a real resurrected body, and a real Savior. And we'll spend 1,000,000 years just wrapping our mind around those things. And then God will open up even more. And we'll spend the next 1,000,000 years figuring that one out. So, yeah. I look forward to it. Yes, Chris. St. Augustine. Yeah, but it make a change to like St. Paul grass. I don't know. Seems like Augustine's maybe a generation two. It seems like an apostle should get the grass named after him. I don't know. Chris, yes. There'll be no marriage or giving in marriage, so I think no. I do wonder though, so lots of speculation has been made about what happens if a 10-year-old passes away, and what happens distinguished between a 90-year-old who passes away, then resurrected body. And there's been a lot of discussion about this, right? What is the person now in heaven? What is that like? And some have suggested they'll be, you've heard this theory, they'll be exactly 33 years old, which is what Jesus is. And so therefore that's the perfect age. I'm like, that's totally random. First of all, I don't know that he was exactly 33 years old when he died. Luke just says he's about 30 years old. So nailing down to say it's 33 seems a little bit over the top to me. Number two is a 33-year-old heavenly body surely has zero real connection to what we understand to be 33 here. So, right, I mean, that's fairly disconnected. But I have heard people speculate on this, whether a 10-year-old goes into heaven and experiences the growth up until this adult age in this heavenly experience, or are they instantaneously changed? I don't know. We're not told. So that intrigues me a little bit. Does that 10-year-old without sin, sinless world, go through the joy of maturing into adulthood, or are they instantaneously adults? Does the 90-year-old instantaneously become young and healthy, or is there this progress towards greater and greater progress of youthfulness? I don't know. I don't know. These are not mysteries that the Bible really spends a lot of time unfolding, though. And so I think it's fine to spend a few moments kind of thinking about them, but I wouldn't obsess over them, because if we were supposed to obsess over them, the Bible would give us more details. But I'm intrigued by some of those things, and I'll read articles about them. I read, there's a series of books by Chuck Black, who is my favorite. I don't do fiction. I just don't read fiction. He's the only fictional author I'll listen to. He's got about 16 books, and I've listened to all of them several times through. The Kingdom series, though, starts with Adam and Eve, but it's all set in medieval times, swords and, those kinds of things, knights, and it's all set in medieval times or whatever, but it's got a final chapter, the final book of the Kingdom series deals with some of these things, and it's very intriguing to me how he handles them in a fictional account and how these things unfold. So I'm always intrigued by that. And I'd never even thought of some of these things, so I read audibled his books. By the way, that's the other thing about his books. The audible on his books are spectacular. And so, Chuck Black. If you have kids that are teens, stuff's awesome. The Knights of Eritrea, that series on Audible, spectacular. And then he's got a more modern one, which is just incredible. Kim and I both listened to it. Really, really good. I forgot the name. I'll think of it in a minute. But anyway, it's so good. So Chuck Black, the 3 books, it's more modern, and it is really intriguing. So if you're into Audible, I highly recommend those books, especially if you have a teen and a road trip. Those books are awesome. Long road trips is usually when I listen to them. So,
Kind of changing the subject, but let's say you've got, for me, a couple of little grandkids, they haven't been saved. So 5 and 9, are they going to heaven?
The kingdom of heaven is made for such as these. Jesus brings a little child into their midst, and the kingdom of heaven is made for such as these. So that'd be weird if suddenly, I was just kidding. So my answer to that is I would start with that. The kingdom of heaven is made for such as these. I would also mention to anyone who brings this topic up is that when Jonah was like, bring fire and brimstone down, burn this place to the ground. Remember that God says, there's thousands of individuals in the city who are so young, they don't even know their left hand from the right hand. You want me to completely destroy them along with the animals? Implication of innocence. right? You want me to destroy border collie? You want me to destroy, the cat? You want me to destroy children who don't know their left hand from the right? To me, he put young children in the same category with animals in that discussion. That's significant to me theologically, because why would he do that if, born into the sin of Adam? I think that's true. I do believe in the sin nature that is inherent, but there's a difference between that and accountability for that. And I would say in the case of Nineveh, the children were born into a sinful world, but they bear, because of their age or innocence or knowledge, innocence the same way an animal would. So there's two examples right off the top of my head where I'd say the kingdom of heaven is for such as these, and this example of Nineveh. There are other examples as well that I could mention, but those two in particular just instantly come to mind. And when having that conversation with someone, that's what I would usually draw upon. Some people will draw upon also King David, saying, I will go to him, he will not come to me, with the death of their first child born of Bathsheba. I like that argument, but here's why I would distinguish it from those other two, is I've had individuals who will argue from Calvinism, they'll say, yeah, for those children that are elect, it's true, but for the unelected children, it's not true. So I don't like the argument with David, because it's fine, it's a good argument. I think it's a hopeful argument, but sometimes people who are more hyper-Calvinists will use that to say, that only gives hope to the people of election. But the Nineveh thing works great, because from Jonah's perspective, the whole city should be wiped out. They're all guilty. And God goes, you want me to wipe out even these little children who don't know their left hand from their right hand? And not give them a chance to hear this offer of repentance and salvation that I had you preach there? And so I think that argument, and then Jesus bringing a little child, a nondescript little child. It's not like, look at this little child, he's from the tribe of Benjamin, but a nondescript little child. The kingdom of heaven is for such as these. I think that is the arguments I'd make for children. Now, someone might say, well, when is this person accountable? And the answer is, I don't know, and neither does anyone else other than God himself. At what point does this person move out of the category of, just like your border collie, this child so young doesn't have accountability for even knowing their left and right, therefore they don't even know the kind of morality that should precipitate judgment? The answer is that may be different for every person. So for instance, you could have an adult child who is special needs, who may never reach this standard of accountability. They're autistic, or they're some other type of disabling capacity at the ability to have this kind of moral conversation. So this is children, and I would say childlike mindset. The reason the Nineveh story works so great is he says there's 100,000 who don't even know their left hand from the right hand. So he doesn't even actually bring up age there. And I would suggest from that could also include individuals who lack the mental capacity to make such decisions. Yeah. That would be my answer to that. Yeah. It's a good question. It comes up a lot. Yeah. Yeah, some people will say, well, the age of accountability is 13. It's 13. And the reason for that, the reason people bring that up is that Jesus himself seems to endorse, or the Bible seems to endorse, the idea of bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, son of the law, daughter of the law, at 13. Jesus goes at 12 to the temple. Remember that? He goes at 12. That was his practice run for the next year's bar mitzvah. 12-year-olds went to the temple to practice for their next year's, the testing and, read from the scroll, those kinds of things. But he shows up and he's got questions and answers that perplex even the most sophisticated rabbi. And that's why it's so shocking. He was supposed to be there to get a practice run for the year where he'll be tested. Instead, he tests them a year early, and they can't answer him. And so some people have tried to say, well, this seems like an endorsement of bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, where son of the law, daughter of the law, that at 13 there's this responsibility now that immediately follows to the child. But just because in Judaism, culturally, maybe even a bit beyond culturally, given Jesus' own endorsement of that, just because they had made a decision to, here's a good dividing line between 12 and 13, like going through puberty and those kinds of things. The responsibility comes with adulting, starting to adult. Also at 13 in Judaism, you would start apprenticeships and some things like that. You might still live in your home, but you would start some apprenticeship training for your career. That, I think, made sense that there was an accountability now. You don't answer your parent, you answer to God himself. You still have to obey your parents, but really you're now responsible to answer to God himself. But to extrapolate that to then say every 13-year-old on the planet falls in this category of being responsible to God, I think would be, again, I go back to the Nineveh example, to where we're not given an age there. We're just told there's a moral compass at a high enough level to be accountable. You okay with that? Some of you are looking at me like, you sure? No, I'm not sure. I'm just telling you what I think. Life is full of such perplexing questions that we don't always get. There's not a verse, right? When you love a verse, here's how you handle this. But I think the reason there's not a verse is that if it was some kind of legal statement. At 13, everyone's accountable. This would just create a ton of additional questions. We actually wouldn't get clarity. We'd just get the next set of questions. So the ambiguity there, I think, is really helpful, because we say there's a level of responsibility that brings someone on accountability. There's a level of lack of awareness that puts the person in the spot of not being accountable yet. All right, well, we're in the book of Isaiah, and I don't know if I can see it or not. We'll see. This thing was really quirky this morning, and so those of you at the 8:30 service, I particularly apologize because I was totally flying blind up here. Normally I can see the next slide. Chris did a great job keeping me on the slides, but normally I can look down a little bit and see a couple of slides in advance, and I'm navigating through that going, I'll just skip this one. I was totally, whatever the next slide is, throw it up there, and I'll figure out what to do with it. And so I mean, like, I knew what was in there. It's not like I was like, I have no idea what the next slide is. But it was more just, normally I might choose to skip a slide or something, and I can control from here without any subtle, hey, I'm going to skip the next slide. And so instead, I'm like, okay, I'm going to do every slide, and hopefully this works out. So hopefully by the second service, I got this figured out. And so you guys, I practiced on you every Sunday, which is what happens at the 8:30 service. I practice on the 8:30 service group, and then I go back at 11, and I mess it up in different ways. Yeah, so I have a whole new set of ways to mess it up. Yeah, anyway. All right, yeah, this is spinning like it's not going to load. Let's see. All right, so today we turn to Isaiah chapter 3. And Isaiah chapter 3 is, so Isaiah 2 is the promise that the future Jerusalem is coming and all the nations will stream to it. I even read it from the sermon this morning. It's directly related to what Paul's talking about in Galatians, right? The New Jerusalem. So, and I think connected to the promises in the book of Revelation, a new Jerusalem descending from heaven. But chapter 3 is God's way of letting Isaiah know, hey, that's really hopeful, really promising. Just so you know, before that happens, I'm going to completely dismantle this thing. So Isaiah 3, and then Isaiah 4 is going to be, here's how I'm going to fix the dismantling. Okay, so you see the picture. Isaiah 2, everything's falling apart. And so Isaiah is like, oh, this is terrible. God says to Isaiah, hey, just so you know, there's a future Jerusalem that's coming. It's going to be amazing. All the nations will stream there. Not for warfare, right? Instead for peace. We want to know the Lord. And Isaiah's like, oh, that's great. That's great. And then he says to Isaiah, yeah, I should mention something to you, by the way, about that. Just want to mention something to you. What's going to happen before that streaming is the complete dismantling. So Isaiah 3 is the complete dismantling. And then Isaiah 4, you know what it opens with? A branch will spring up. How are we going to get Isaiah 2 after Isaiah 3? Answer, Messiah is coming. That's the progress, the progressive thought through here. Okay, so you can see it building. All right, so Isaiah 3. For behold, the Lord God of hosts is going to remove. You see the word remove? That's the theme of many of these verses. What is he going to remove? He's going to remove from Jerusalem and Judah. What is he going to remove? Both supply and support, the whole supply of bread and the whole supply of water. He is going to remove my ability to change slides. That's what he's going to remove. the mighty men and the warrior, the judge and the prophet, the diviner and the elder, the captain of 50 and the honorable man, the counselor and the expert artisan, and the skillful enchanter. And I will make mere lads of their princes, and capricious children will rule over them. And the people will be oppressed, each one by one another, and each one by his neighbor. The youth will storm against the elder, and the inferior against the honorable. When a man lays hold of his brother in his father's house, saying, you have a cloak, you be our ruler, and these ruins will be under your charge. So we go after this. This is the chapter after. All the nations will stream. This city's going to be amazing. No more warfare. Chapter 3. Any guy who happens to own a coat, he gets to be king because we're fresh out of coats. And so that's a very different, and it's to rule over the ruins, right? So this is in contrast to Isaiah 2. He will protest on that day, saying, I will not be your healer, for in my house there is neither bread nor cloak. You should not appoint me to be ruler of the people. By the way, all this builds to chapter 4, and a root will spring forth from Jesse. We can't find a single person in Jerusalem and these ruins that owns a coat. How are we ever going to get to all the nations streaming? Answer, the ruler's coming. The one to set all this stuff right. Okay, so that's where we're building to. All right. He says, for Jerusalem has stumbled and Judah has fallen because their speech and their actions are against the Lord, to rebel against his glorious presence. The expression of their faces bears witness against them, and they display their sin like Sodom. They do not even conceal it. Woe to them, for they have brought evil on themselves. Say to the righteous that it will go well with them, for they will eat the fruit of their actions. Woe to the wicked, it will go badly for him, and what he deserves will be done to him. Oh, my people, their oppressors are children, and women rule over them. Oh, quick footnote on this verse. Theological bullies on Twitter love this verse because these are people who are extreme complementarians. They'll post it on, I'm just telling you what's out there, okay? Just so you know. This verse shows up a ton in the Twitterverse, or X, whatever they call themselves, like whatever, yeah. I realize right now, like, certain cars are persona non grata, which is really frustrating because I am about to buy one for my wife who's having neurological problems, and having the full self-drive mode would really help her. So if she shows up here in 6 months with a Tesla, just know I'm not making a political statement. I've done a ton of research on this. And for her, when she has to go from Waxahachie into downtown Dallas, when she works for Texas, so she works for Hope Clinic, but she has a side gig. She's a professor of clinical studies for Texas A&M Medical School. And she has medical students. And she has to go down and meet with them and do lectures from time to time. And driving for her is exhausting, right? I mean, it's just taxing. So I'm going to probably get her one. And if you go, oh, there's a political statement. It is not. I've done my research, and there is no other FSDs that are under $100,000. So, and even those only work on certain roads. I found this out. I did all my research on this. It's like, yeah, if you want to drive on these 5 roads, you can go hands-free on this thing. It's like, okay, that's helpful if you live on those 5 roads, but if you don't, you can't. So I'm just letting you guys know this has nothing to do with any of this, okay? But the reason I bring this up is in the political world right now, all kinds of crazy things are going on. Like, burn this car, and it's both directions. By the way, I'm not saying this is neither political party. It is so extreme on both sides, like burn everything to the ground for the opponent. And then it's weird because the other side celebrates, and then they grouse when it's happening to their side. It's like, let's quit burning stuff. How about that? I mean, from both sides, everyone stop doing that, okay? But one of the things that happens, I'm just letting you know how bad the kind of the theological world is sometimes right now. Something bad happens, and a politician that happens to be female says something. These people in the Twitterverse will go, this is the judgment of the Lord to let women rule. And they're like, that's your extraction from this verse?
The theological political world are
Yeah.
whining
Yes. Right. And the point of this is not that having a woman involved in leadership is trouble. The point of this is that, here's the real point of this. They have no warriors left. There's no one left in town to defend them. And this isn't about whether women rule or not. This is about they're getting destroyed in warfare, and they don't have a single dude to put a cloak on who needs to lead an army out. That's why it says children and women rule over them. The whole point here is that the people having to take over leadership is because they don't have a single warrior to put a sword in their hand. This isn't a knock on, that would be, if you follow this verse, this would mean, well, children are evil too. It's like, what in the world? I'm only mentioning this to you because if you're in that Twitter sphere or that expert, world, or any of these online blogs and stuff, this verse is one of the most popular verses right now to be quoted from those individuals. Do you know that? This random verse. It's terrible. It's not a good application of anything they're claiming. There are some male and female politicians in America today who are spectacular. So quit with this nonsense, okay? That's just nonsense. So anyway, I just mentioned it to you because you may come across this, and it's being used like that. So like I said, but the crazy on both sides right now is really taken off. It's like, and so now I feel guilty. It's like I want to get my wife this car that I think will really help her. And I'm like, what will people say about me? Maybe people think I'm making a political statement. Are people going to write, stuff on the side of her car when all I want to do is get her from point A to B safely because of some of the neurological symptoms? So that seems like not a spot that anyone in America should be in. On either side of this, like I don't care what your political opinion is. I was just like, my motive behind it is really simple. And now I'm like, oh, is she going to get targeted? Is someone going to key her car? Is it, all those kinds of things. And I don't want anyone on either side of the political spectrum having to have that kind of worry. Why should anyone have to worry about that? So this is a bit frustrating. But it's this kind of extreme logic that gets used. You even see it in the theological circles. And I see posts online with this verse that make really caustic statement about a female politician. And I just go, this is not helping. It's unkind, it's unloving, it's not what a believer should be doing. And these are pastors of churches. So when I say both sides on these extremes, that's what I'm talking about. These are pastors of churches who will see a female politician say something they disagree with, and they'll post this verse and say, this is God's judgment on America because God let this female in charge the way he let this happen in Jerusalem during Isaiah's day. See what I'm saying? Terrible extrapolation of theology. The reason that it's an oppressing is that they don't have a guy who can pick up a sword and defend the city. That's the whole point here. They have no warriors left. This isn't a knock on children. It's not a knock on women. It's a knock on the fact that, remember, there's like, you have a cloak, you defend us. And he's like, I don't own one. And they go through all the city. They can't find a single person. Like, I guess some of the children and women are going to have to take over defending the city of Jerusalem as it sits in ruins. And so I think that's more the issue here. This is not a knock on women in any leadership roles or stuff like that, because the Bible has women in some leadership roles. We have a female judge, Deborah, like in the midst of warfare. So this extrapolation is completely unfair, huh? Yeah, King Josiah is 9. That's not an oppressive thing, the fact that he was a child. It worked out really well. He's a good king. Yes, Chris.
I know that you and I can't even point to the scripture, but you have that one in, maybe that those who are going to be teachers are held to a higher standard. Well, these pastors are in that position where they're teaching. Are they going to be held to this higher standard by the Lord at some point? What are you doing with my scripture?
Yeah, sure. No, it's a verse that haunts me, actually. Don't clamor for the teaching position because those who do will be judged by a stricter judgment. Yeah, it's a terrifying verse. As a pastor, I'm under, sometimes I think of Spurgeon's quote on this. I think I mentioned this quote to someone this week. Spurgeon had someone say, man, I'd love to pastor a church like yours. He had this huge church. And he said to this guy, he goes, yeah, but you have to answer to God for each person coming every Sunday. You sure you want a big church? Maybe you'd be better off with a small church so that you have fewer people to answer for when you get to heaven. I was like, yeah, give me a church of 1. Even that sounds dangerous, but I'm just saying, preach to myself, accountable. That's still scary accountability. But yeah, I agree. And that's why when I see things like that, like I said, here's the thing. It's unloving. It's unloving. It's unkind. It's grinding a political point that has nothing to do with this. If you disagree with someone politically, though I'm not really strongly political, I'm like, there's kind ways to talk about things. That's not it. A pastor, of all things, should be at least somewhat kind, right? And so when I see posts like that, I am a little bit disheartened by it, because these are from individuals who are pastors of churches. They know the scripture really well. But this verse has been coming up a lot lately in the political sphere from pastors, used as a hammer against female politicians. So I just want to mention that to you. Who would have thought that Isaiah 4:12 or 3:12 was a big player in the Twitterverse? But it absolutely is. It shows up almost every day on my feed. Now it's the, you know how this works, the social media thing. They have an apparatus to figure out what things they should bring into your vision. And for me, I'm going to get a lot of theological, pastoral type things. I get debates between Catholics and Protestants. Things like that. I get a lot of those kinds of posts, and I engage in them. I'm not like necessarily post anything, but I go read them. If you click on them, you read them, then X or Facebook or Instagram, they figure out, oh, you like things like this, and they give you a bunch more of them. So I'll go on mine, and you get a lot of baseball stuff too, but you get a lot of these things, various articles like that. So I see it probably more than most, but I'm just letting you know, I see a lot of it, and these are people who have hundreds of thousands of followers too. And the engagements on verses like this are lengthy. Thousands of responses to them. So it's not nothing. Like there's a subculture going on here. So I'm just letting you know, I don't think this is the point of this verse. I think the whole point of this is that their oppressors are children and women rule over them, is they don't have a dude who can put on a cloak and get a sword and defend their city. They're so weak, a child could walk in and take over. They're so weak that, one lady who's just out for a stroll is like, I'll tell you what, I'll just go ahead and conquer Jerusalem today, because they don't have anyone to defend them. Like, they got nothing. That's the whole point of this verse. This is not a knock on women. Mercy. Anyway, those who guide you lead you astray and confuse the direction of your paths. The Lord arise to contend and stand to judge the people. The Lord enters into judgment with the elders and princes of his people. It is you who have devoured the vineyard. Okay, so this vineyard, this plays a significant role. There's a couple of places in the Old Testament where vineyard, as a picture of the people of God in the city of Jerusalem, are part of the language of Old Testament prophecy. And this plays a role then in Jesus' use of this when he talks about the vineyard that has been lent out to the land renters. Remember that? And I think Jesus is drawing on this imagery. This isn't the only vineyard reference in Isaiah and in the Old Testament. This is one of them. It is you who have devoured the vineyard. And this vineyard winds up being incorporated into the theology of the city of Jerusalem and the people of Israel and the rulers who are supposed to be taking charge of the vineyard. Did you teach on that, Richard, when we were... Because when in John 15, where you get Jesus, I am the vine, you are the branches. I can't remember. You didn't do that one? I know you did the shepherds. Maybe I did some of the vineyard stuff. But in the Old Testament, there's these vineyard texts, and it seems like Jesus is drawing on that in John 15. It also seems like Jesus is drawing on that in Matthew when he tells the parable of the land renters, the tenants who are renting the land. I made brief reference to it this morning. It is more of an allegory than a parable, though, because the people who come are prophets. They abuse some, kill others. Then he sends his son. They kill him. And then there's a final statement. What will he do with them? He'll come and destroy. So there's a lot of elements to that parable. So it's more allegorical because there's multiple elements to it that are based in direct pointing to this is this is this. And he tells them that. Yeah. I think that's the parable, though, that one of the disciples said, I think this is the one, that he pulls Jesus aside and says, hey, I think you offended them. Such a great moment. Oh my goodness. At the time, it probably didn't seem like a big deal. I listen to that now and go, that is awesome. One of the disciples just trying to let Jesus know, hey, from a PR perspective, Jesus, I just wanted to let you know that in terms of our market share, our market share is going to go way down like this. This is a bad PR move on your part. I don't know if you know this. You offended them. But I think it was about that parable. And they saw themselves as the ones who had rejected all the prophets and now were going to kill him. And the disciples saw the look on their face while he told it. He's like, reading the room. He goes, I don't think they like that story, Jesus. So great. All right. What do you mean by crushing my people and grinding the face of the poor, declares the Lord of hosts? Moreover, the Lord said, because the daughters of Zion are proud and walk with their heads held high and seductive eyes and go along with menacing steps, and they play bangles on their feet, so cymbals. Yeah, they have cymbals on their feet. Therefore, the Lord will afflict the scalp of the daughters of Zion with scabs, and the Lord will make their foreheads bare. In that day, he will take away the beauty of their anklets, headbands, crescent ornaments. Crescent ornaments likely is a reference to Zoroastrianism that had started to creep into their celebrations, right? The crescent ornament. The celebration of the crescent as an aspect of worship or religious expression has its history in Zoroastrianism. And I'll let you extrapolate. One other place we see it even today, but I'll let you extrapolate to there. All right, and so he talks through all these things. They're going to lose all that. They have hand mirrors. I think, that's pretty interesting. They have hand mirrors. These are individuals with some pretty serious resources. I can't imagine a hand mirror in 700 BC being an inexpensive item. I would think that would take a little bit of, that's some resources. I mean, for us, you can buy one for $2 at Walmart, or just go to your car and flip down the visor or whatever. But they still put mirrors on those, yes? On the visor? Okay. Some of you are like, you should try it, preacher. But anyway, hand mirrors, undergarments, turbans, and veils. In other words, they're really dressed up. It will come about instead of sweet perfume, there will be putrefaction. Instead of a belt, a rope. Instead of well-set hair, plucked out scalp. Instead of fine clothes, a donning of sackcloth. And branding instead of beauty. Your men will fall by the sword, your mighty ones in battle. And their gates will lament and mourn. And deserted she will sit on the ground. And then Isaiah 4:1. So this is the last verse for this section. Isaiah 4:1, because Isaiah 44:2 is a branch will spring forth. Isaiah 4:1 is 7 women will take hold of one man in that day, saying, we will eat our own bread and wear our own clothes, only let us be called by your name and take away our reproach. And she's like, where is there any hope for the future of Israel? Answer, the Lord God will preserve a remnant, and from that remnant a righteous branch will come. And so after Isaiah 3, which is a very hard chapter in terms of destruction and misery, heartbreaking, the men of Jerusalem are basically completely gone. The only men there have no resources. They can't field an army. Women and children could come and conquer them. They're so thin in terms of military defense or army or resources. Some kid will show up and say, all right, I'm taking over. They're like, yep, you got it. There's nothing we can do here. And the whole point of this text is Isaiah 2, he tells them there's this future Jerusalem coming. All the nations will stream to Jerusalem, and they'll take their weapons of war and change them into instruments of farming, right? And so there's no worry for Jerusalem then. There will never be any more warfare, right? No worries there. Then chapter 3, you go, yeah, actually, things are so bad coming for Jerusalem that some kid with a play toy, is going to show up and defeat the whole city. Some lady who's out for a stroll will be like, well, you know what, I'll conquer Jerusalem today. And it's a bit hyperbolic, I get it, but that's the whole point, is that there's not any defense for the city. And so you take those two, and you get here. There's not only is there no defense, there's no even hope of a propagating of the name of the Jewish people or the family. You go, this is totally hopeless. And the very next verse is, I'm not done writing the story. I will say I think this is a fair statement, that God is a God of second chances and a God of lost causes. Is that too big an extrapolation for these things? Because if you were to ask Isaiah at verse 4:1, hey, how you doing today, Isaiah? Not so good. This seems hopeless, right? And the very next verse is, yeah, but I don't need some dude with a sword, right? Not by might, not by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord. And so I think God is a God of broken people and a God of lost causes and a God of hopelessness and a God who takes things that are in the ashes and somehow redeems them and makes them good, which is why, if he can do that with Jerusalem, and I don't think this is too big an extrapolation, because I do think this is a hint of, even in the New Testament, the way Jerusalem has, I make all things new. Remember that in Revelation? Where he takes the holy city, and he says, new city, and the statement is, I make all things new, is in the midst of that. And including that is the resurrection of the believer and the resurrected body and the restoration. So I do think that God takes things that appear to be completely burned to the ground, the ashes of life, and he can redeem them. You ever been hopeless? I felt hopeless before about situations. I felt hopeless about my own situation. I felt hopeless about people around me that I love, right? You just go, I don't see how this is fixable. I don't see how this is redeemable. But we do cling to the fact that the God who takes brokenness and hopelessness and out of the ashes, hope springs eternal, is that we always maintain the idea of hope and that God can redeem anything and anyone. So don't give up hope. Keep praying, keep fighting, keep battling through each day. Keep looking to God to redeem. Yeah. Yes, Alan.
You know, back in verse 12 where it talks about children and women as expressions, the new RSV has a completely different.
Oh, really? What does it say?
It says, my people, their oppressors extort them, and the creditors rule over them.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So instead of talking about children and women, it just talks about oppressors and creditors.
Wow. That's pretty surprising. Well, this is New American Standard, so I would lean towards they probably are being more wooden with it. That doesn't mean they're right. It just means they're being more wooden. Maybe there are other ways in which those words can be used.
No, it says that creditors comes from the Greek Septuagint, whereas Hebrew says women.
So they picked the Greek Septuagint over the Hebrew. Okay, then. Yeah,
But it's completely
that's very different. Yeah. Yes, sir. Oh, it does? Okay. Yeah. Oh, that's an interesting translation decision by them. The people that are online, a lot of them love the King James. I know that wouldn't surprise you. They love the New King James or the King James. So I guarantee that one probably has children and women based on the number of times I've seen the reference on in the Twitterverse. So, yeah, who knew that Isaiah 3:12 would be such a big player? If I were to say, what verses from the Old Testament you think would be a big player in theological debate on social media, you'd be like, well, I don't know, maybe Genesis 1:1, Genesis 1:27, he made them in his image. I don't know, maybe something about the fall, maybe something about David or Moses or the law. No, Isaiah 3:12. What? Isaiah 3:12 is like they're just randomly lifting this verse out of nowhere and using it like a hammer. And I don't like that kind of thing. It makes me a bit disappointed with the approach. So, all right. Well, you guys, that's That's Isaiah 3. I'm not going to, on the line by line, verse by verse, I'm not going to analyze every single verse like we did with Micah. There's times we're going to cover a section together. And I had notes, but the notes are pretty similar to the text that we talked through. And so next week we'll get into Isaiah 4. Isaiah 4 is our first real introduction into a person that is coming. We get hope of the city in Jerusalem and restoration. But Isaiah 4 is the first time we really get a glimpse into there's this person that's coming. And that's it. That's where the intrigue, and it works its way, that theme works its way throughout the rest of Isaiah. We keep coming back to it. Looking for a person. This person's going to be the one that makes all this right, to take all this brokenness and reset it. So, all right, you guys are amazing. Let's pray together. God, you are gracious and good and kind. Thank you for your love and mercy and grace. Thank you for the word that you have given us. We pray all these things in your name. Amen. Oh, there's one more thing I wanted to mention to you. So I was driving last Sunday. I was driving in, okay? I'm driving in, not in a Tesla, in my SUV. Someone fixed my bumper. I got the bumper repaired. So, yeah. Now, the lift gate's got to be bent back into shape, and they're going to try that next weekend. So I'm like, okay, let's try it. It's got 300,000 miles on it. What can they do to it, you know? That's the thing. That's the thing. By the way, if you're going to key up a vehicle, don't key up some poor person's brand new car. Mess up my SUV. No one cares. Leave that guy alone. This poor person bought this car a year ago trying to save some gas money, and you go out there and key it. Like, leave that person alone. They're trying to just be a person. Leave them alone. Key up my SUV instead. I'll take it. I'll take it. I'll be okay. I'll be okay. Leave that poor lady's just trying to get to work. Leave her alone. Oh my goodness. And their poor insurance, you know, she's going to have to call her agent. Like, I got all keyed up. I'm like, oh, leave her alone. She doesn't have anything to do with this stuff. Leave her alone. All right. But if you need to get that out, that energy out, hey, it's not my thing. But if you need to get that energy out, I'll offer to you my SUV because it's got 300,000 miles on it. And I won't care. I won't care. I'll be like, oh, additional character marks. But anyway, so, no, I was thinking about this. So last week I'm driving in. 5 a.m. I'm driving in, and on the highway, I don't understand this sign, but there's one of those lit up signs where they can change the wording on it, and here's what it said: obey warning signs, which is weird to me because if I'm not going to obey warning signs, I'm not going to obey this sign too. So that, it was a weird sign to me, where it's like, wait a minute, if I don't obey warning signs, I'm not obeying this one either. So I'm not sure what that sign's supposed to get you to do. And like, we paid, I know, that was the other thing I was going, they used my tax dollars for this? This doesn't seem like good. The warning sign seemed like a good idea for tax dollars, but to tell someone they need to obey them, if they don't obey them, they're not going to obey this one. So I was like, man, that doesn't seem like good use of tax dollars. However, when I saw it last Sunday, I was driving in, I was thinking about Isaiah, and I was like, this is the theme of Isaiah. And I thought about it even further because as I was driving, going, well, who makes a sign that says you should obey signs for people who don't obey signs? Like, why would they do that? And I was like, that's what Isaiah did. It is what Isaiah did, right? He's like, y'all should obey these signs to a group of people who aren't obeying the signs. And so I was like, wait a minute, this is genius. The state of Texas is basically like Isaiah. The state of Texas is like Isaiah. It's like, obey the warning signs, knowing full well they weren't going to obey the warning signs. So when I saw this last Sunday, I didn't want to take a picture of it because that would fail to obey warning signs, which is taking photos with your phone while driving. And that would have put me in the category of people who didn't obey warning signs. So I was like, you know what, I'll have to find one online. Now, this isn't as good as the one I saw because the one I saw was like lit up. Like it was one of those where they can change the words. It was cooler. And I even thought about this morning driving by on the frontage road, stopping, getting out and taking a picture. But I was like, nah, I'm not doing that. So anyway, I used a cheap picture instead. Yeah. Yes, Chris.
So in Isaiah, didn't they go into exile?
Yes.
So where are we going to get exiled?
For failing to do this? I don't, what'd you say, Oklahoma? Oh, come on, I like Oklahoma. But no, I don't know where you get exiled for failing to do this. I don't know. I think you have to switch insurance companies. I don't know. So instead of worshiping in Jerusalem, you have to use State Farm instead of Allstate. I don't know. I'm not sure.
What about the allegory?
What allegory? I don't know. Anyway, I meant to show you this picture earlier, but I got to talk about other stuff. But I saw this last week, and I thought of Isaiah. I was like, this is Isaiah, obey warning signs to a people he knew weren't going to obey him, just like the person who put this up knew we're not going to